How can you get a marriage green card as a DACA recipient without leaving the United States? In this video, let's talk about a scenario where you're married to a US citizen, you don't have any prior criminal or immigration issues that would make you ineligible for a green card, and you want to take an advance parole route to gain your lawful entry. Look, this is a big video since we will share some crazy timelines with you that will really inspire you to take action and address your immigration situation ASAP. First thing I will say is that DACA recipients often don't want to even think about their immigration, and they often delay this process because they're intimidated. I want to start this discussion by acknowledging that DACA recipients often have deep-rooted fears around immigration, and in my experience, they often postpone dealing with this whole thing because it's a painful and scary subject. It becomes especially scary when they have to consider leaving the US in order to get a green card. I've met couples who've been married for many years and they qualified to go through this process long ago, but they're either afraid about not being able to come back to the US, or they're also fearful that this whole process will be extremely expensive and long, which it absolutely does not have to be. I'm bringing this up because unfortunately we live in a country where immigration laws can drastically change depending on who we have as our president, and the upcoming presidential elections mean that this might be time to consider your immigration options. Plus, there's no better time to start on any process than right now. Right now is always better than never. I also want to mention that as a DACA recipient, you might fall under two different scenarios, right? So maybe you entered the US with an inspection as a child or even as a baby many years ago. Let's say your parents used a tourist visa to enter the US, but you overstayed by many years. Well, in that case, your situation is more straightforward and you can go straight to one-step marriage adjustment of status since your unlawful presence is forgiven when you marry a US citizen. We recently had a scenario like that where the couple got approved for their green card in only 55 days. However, it is also possible that you entered the US without an inspection, and that's exactly the scenario we will discuss in this video. Let's imagine that you entered the US without an inspection, but you're currently a DACA holder and you had no interruptions in your DACA. You can apply for what's called an advance parole. Getting an advance parole means that if you leave the United States, you will be able to re-enter back without an issue so long as you left for a specific purpose. And then this lawful entry allows you to file for a marriage adjustment of status and get your green card inside the United States. Look, there are three ways to get an advance parole. First, if you plan on studying or taking a course in another country, you can get an advance parole. Second, it can be a work-related trip. Let's imagine you work for a tech company and they want you to attend a conference or training overseas. That could be a very good reason to apply for this permit. But the most common way to get an advance parole or AP is for humanitarian reasons. That generally means that you have a sick relative back home who you need to visit, but there are some additional reasons that might apply to you as well, such as visiting a family member's grave. This would normally work up to 2 years after your family member's death. If you are now past those 2 years, you will need to add a second reason to your application. You can also get an advance parole for dental and fertility treatment, for inheritance reasons, and missionary work. You can actually get pretty creative with this. As an example, we've seen people get their AP to go and get their wisdom teeth removed, get braces, LASIK eye surgery, etc. Just know that you will need to attach supporting evidence, so it's important to prepare a complete application so that it gets approved on the first shot. In our experience, many immigrants choose to handle this portion of the process themselves because there's sometimes this inherent lack of trust in lawyers. You know, in immigrant families and communities, someone inevitably had a bad experience with a professional, so then people tend to be skeptical. But it's always best to at least consult with one or two attorneys so they can make sure that you actually qualify. By the way, going back to the conversation regarding the president in the office, you need to know that during Trump administration, this advance parole route was stopped and restarted later on. That is why it is so important to take action as soon as possible, and know that getting an advance parole approved usually takes about 6 months, so you do need to plan accordingly. Know that these paroles for humanitarian reasons are granted favorably more often than not, and although it might seem like a scary route, it is also a way to get your green card and citizenship in a relatively short time. Just to give you an idea, we just had a DACA recipient get their green card in only 32 days and another one in about 2 months. We actually sat down to interview the first couple, and you should definitely check out our interview since they go deep on their experience going through this process. Our program actually doesn't assist with getting an AP. We always start working with couples after they get back into the US with their lawful entry. And interestingly enough, the second couple I mentioned earlier, they worked with a law firm for an advance parole, but their attorney sent all their paperwork for AP without any translations, meaning all the documents were sent in Spanish, which of course triggered an RFE and a delay. So when it came to going through the marriage adjustment, they just didn't feel comfortable not having control over their own case. Through our approach, they prepped their entire application in under 2 weeks and got their green card in no time. Sometimes doing it yourself, especially while knowing what you're doing, actually saves you a bunch of time. All right, just to recap, this is how this process would look like. You currently have DACA and you keep it active throughout the entire process. You apply for advance parole, or sometimes an emergency advance parole, which is a whole different process, but it is also something you could qualify for, so it's important to mention it. From there, you will get your approval, you will travel overseas, you will re-enter back to the US, and your advance parole document will be stamped by an immigration official, which is now your green light to move forward with your marriage adjustment of status. Since we work with Marriage AOS all the time, it's important to briefly mention what happens from there, okay? So at this point, you need to prove two things to get a green card. First, that you have a genuine relationship with a US citizen, which is done through Form I-130, and that is why all of your bona fide marriage evidence has to be attached to that form. It's honestly the biggest part of your application, and the list of what you can include with it is endless. Make sure to grab our free list of examples under this video. Plus, we have so many videos covering that part, definitely check it out. Couples often focus on photos, and that's of course very important, but there's a lot more to this than just photos. The second thing is that you actually need to show that you qualify for a green card, which is done through Form I-485. And that is where your lawful entry comes into play, since you are showing that you lawfully entered the US, and it's one of the requirements to get a green card inside the US. It's important to know that you need to include a bunch of other forms with your application. We created a mini course that covers all the forms and filing fees, so you can also find it under this video. It's very helpful if you're trying to learn more about the process. Otherwise, the final step in this whole process is an interview. It's actually somewhat rare to have an interview these days, since the USCIS has waived so many of them lately. Both couples I mentioned previously got their green cards in the mail without having to go to an interview, and that's why everything happened so fast. You also need to know that your immigration process doesn't end there. If your green card gets approved before your second wedding anniversary, you will get a conditional green card valid for 2 years, and you will need to go through a separate process called the removal of conditions, and then naturalization, where you actually become a US citizen. If your green card gets approved after your second wedding anniversary, you will get a 10-year green card, and you will go straight to naturalization after 3 years, so long as you're married to a US citizen. Either way, it is always very much convenient to handle this whole process in just one place, and that's why we support couples through all 3 steps inside our marriage immigration method. If you're working with a traditional attorney, you would also want to handle all these steps with them, since they will be so familiar with your case. Look, if you still have questions after watching this video, please drop them in the comments so that we can address them right away. Otherwise, give this video a like, and we will see you next week.